It's my absolute pleasure and honor to introduce the group of individuals that you see before you. But before I do so, please allow me to thank the Community Foundation of Broward, which helps support this program. Thank you, Bonnie Clearwater, Director and Chief Curator of NSU Art Museum. Thank you, NSU Art Museum, and thank you, Nova Southeastern University, for providing programs like Community Voices to be served in the museum space. Just a little background of Community Voices. It was launched in 2021. Community Voices is an initiative that focuses on exploring social and racial inequalities and challenging social structures, including representations in museums. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and introduce our panelists. Dr. Marquese McFerguson, Professor of Intercultural Communications at FAU, an award-winning slam poet and teaching artist. In 2020, he was the recipient of the Art Buckner Outstanding Doctoral Research Scholar Award from the University of South Florida. Thank you, Dr. Marquese McFerguson, for being here and hosting this. Emmy-nominated Miami-based multidisciplinary artist and art educator who hails from Haiti. Through contemporary reconfiguration of the Black experience, his work catalogs a powerful record of environmental decay and the intersection of economic inequity and the commodification of the industry, personal labor, and race. Morel Doucet. Welcome, Morel. Thank you for being here. Contemporary artist and curator based in Miami. At heart, he is an educator. He challenges the viewer to make meaning of dense iconography derived from the Caribbean history, politics, and religion. I strongly encourage you to visit the museum after your experience here today to witness his permanent installation in NSU Art Museum. Edouard Duval-Carrie.
All right, can everyone hear me? All right. So thank you, Lisa, for that introduction, and thank you, the NSU Museum of Art, for allowing us to have this great discussion today. I'm super excited to be able to talk to Edouard and Morel. Pronunciation is important to me. Once again, I said that. We're going to kind of start with some general questions to begin with, and then kind of spiral from those. And so, beginning, as I kind of stated earlier, I would like for you all to kind of share a little bit about your journey to becoming an artist, and at what point in your life did you know, like, for sure, this is what I want to do? Yeah, so.
Should I start?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, I was born in Haiti, and at one point my parents, due to the situation there, political, which is always the story of Haiti, decided to move, and we ended up in Puerto Rico, where I lived from 9 years old to 15 years old. And they decided, my parents, to return to Haiti, and that's when, I mean, I don't know what happened, you know, like it was quite a revelation after spending, my youth in Puerto Rico, to return to a place that I thought I knew, but I didn't know at all. And one thing that really struck me is, like the particularity of the space. And I went around, and what really caught my eyes was my first visit to the Centre d'Art. And the Centre d'Art is, probably the only institution on the island that deals and serves artists and the art community. Once I got there, I realized that there was something much more complex going on on that island that I needed to find out. And I haven't stopped, like trying to understand Haiti, the Black world. All of that follows. Yeah. And it's been a lot of research, but very gratifying, because these are stories. The stories of places like Haiti, yeah, all the way back to Africa, are stories that have been silenced or been put under the carpet as uninteresting or irrelevant. So I think they are very relevant and they are very important, and that's what I'm trying to do with my work.
Got you. Yeah, I think watching one of your interviews, you talked about the unique connection between Haiti, France, and then northern Florida. And a lot of times when you're thinking about Florida as a whole, a lot of times you probably don't make those connections to those other two countries and the influence that they've had on this place here, right? And so I think this kind of speaks to that whole sweeping under the carpet and under the rug that you're speaking of. Morel, can you speak to, like, at what point did you know for sure you were going to be a visual artist, or you wanted to be?
So a little bit about my background. I was born in Haiti. I left Haiti when I was about 3 or 4. We were displaced because of the political turmoil. My father was a doctor. My mother was an educator. And then, so essentially, my father was in prison because the government did not want him helping certain people. And so as a doctor, you take an oath to help anybody regardless of their political affiliation. And so when the U.S. intervened, my mom and father was like, we gotta go. If we stay, something is gonna happen. And so within a matter of 3 days, they were picked up from Haiti and dropped in Mobile, Alabama. And so you can imagine the culture shock. I was 3, but I have a very vivid memory. I know we got there in the dead of winter. The trees were all dead. The sky was gray. The sun was gone. And so at an early age, I've always had this fascination with the environment, the idea of change and how the environment affects the people around them. And so after 6 months, they relocated to South Florida and been here for over 20 years. And so I would say, as a child of an immigrant, my experience is their experience. I remember as early as elementary school going to meetings with them, trying to translate documents and translate what was being said at an early age. And so I had to grow up really, really fast. And so for me, as an artist, it was my mental escape from trying to help my mom and dad, but then trying to be a child at the same time. And so art became this kind of refuge to be in my imagination, to escape from the norm of everyday life, trying to navigate as a new immigrant in this country that was very much foreign to me and my parents. And then, so I was very fortunate. I always had this raw talent. And so as early as elementary school, I had educators and teachers that would guide me towards these programs. So my mom did not understand a single thing, but if the teacher said something, she agreed to it. And so I had a teacher like, he's really talented, he has this raw talent, and there's schools that specialize in this, and he can take his raw talent and cultivate it and mold it into something. And so I actually have a really good friend who's gone to middle school and in high school with me, and she's part of that same system of schooling and educators that really, really just guided us. I wanted to kind of switch over, since we're talking about the political turmoil. So this is a recent commission piece over here by the American Craft Council. And the title is The Hills We Die On, Flowers for President Jovenel Moise. And as you guys know, he was assassinated not too long ago. And so this piece speaks to the political turmoil that's been happening here in Haiti. And it's a ceramic form, and the head is decapitated. The piece, I'm trying to communicate a little bit beauty of Haiti, but then at the same time, the lining around the neck is very violent. And so this is like the duality between Haiti. It's both poetic, it's a beautiful island, there's a lot of resource, there's a lot of opportunities, but then the resource, the network, the government, the infrastructure are not in place. And so this piece talks a little bit about that.
Gotcha. Yeah. So 2 things. One, I think prior to everything getting started, we talked about how coming from a Caribbean family and being an immigrant, how oftentimes those parents have sacrificed a lot, and so they want those kids to be doctors and lawyers. And so for you to be like, yeah, I'm going to be an artist, what was that conversation like? But I listening to interviews once again to have that support from your family was beautiful. But I think like you showing this artwork kind of helps me segue to the next question that I want to ask both of you all, because we, prior to getting started, talked about the importance of representation. And oftentimes, even growing up, I rarely saw visual artists that look like me. And so how does your Haitian/Caribbean background inform your artwork? And why is it important for that to be present in the work that you do?
So I come from a family of historians. My mother is one of 11 kids. And so out of the 11, 7 of them are historians. And so growing up, they always told me, look, if you know where you come from, that you know where you're going, and nobody cannot change the conviction of your history. And so I never really understood what that meant. And my grandfather would tell me this all the time. And it wasn't until I became an artist that I realized that as artists, we are essentially the cultural bearers of the history. And with a lot of Haitian art, especially coming from the north of Haiti, the history, the war, a lot of that is cultivated in tune within the artwork. And so growing up for me, there was no black artists growing up. And honestly, I didn't have my first visual arts black teacher until high school. Wow. So growing up, my teachers were either white or Hispanic. And so I had a very tunnel idea of what art history was and who was represented within that kind of nuance a little bit.
Me, I was like, wanting to join the Centre d'Art was like, it's called the Cradle of Haitian Art. And when I was pretty young, maybe 14, I joined and started taking classes there. Taking classes at the Centre d'Art, I was introduced to the first generation of artists that were connected to that institution. And I emulated them, respected them, and always looked at what they were doing. But of course, I was much younger then, and I wanted to bring something new to the table, and I've always been trying to do that. And also, I was trying to understand my country. I mean, the history of my country is very complex, and it's been since day one for me a challenge to really present it in a format that could be comprehensible, not only to me, but to everybody that looked at it. So there is a lot of history involved. There is a lot of research on not only the history of Haiti, but the history of the discovery of the New World. I mean, what happened then? What is that? The discrepancies between the different colonizing powers, and all of this is of great interest to me. And this is what I try to insert myself in, because it's the history not only of Haiti but of all this New World. The United States were colonized, they had to rebel, they had to do this, they had to do that. I mean, and the continuation of this struggle, and of these ways of trying to figure out what the world is for all of us in the Americas, I mean, is something to, you have to look at it very carefully. Because it's not given. I mean, what's our place in it as far as Caribbean people? What's our place in it as black or brown or whatever? Or, it's always, these are stories that have been, as I said, erased or not, portrayed properly. And I've always felt that it was my role when I heard a story and that there was absolutely no visuals to accompany it, to try to create it or formulate it in a way that would make it interesting.
Gotcha. Yeah. I think that's a beautiful way to put it. A lot of times your artwork can be visual storytelling, and also being able to try to tell the stories that are often not being told or being misrepresented. And so that kind of allows us to segue into, in 2020 in the United States, I think we've reached a tipping point when it came to racial tension and just a lot of things, social uprising, but then even transitioning past 2020. You talked just a minute ago about the turmoil that was going on in Haiti. I often think when events like that happen and take place, people begin to speak back to, and always spoke back to power, but oftentimes visual artists and artists in general are often overlooked in that struggle. So say, for instance, when you look at even in the United States in the 60s and 70s, the Black Arts Movement, so forth and so on, but we often don't hear about that. I didn't learn about the Black Arts Movement until in college, and I did the research on my own. And so can you kind of speak to how you have used your artwork, not only as something to be visually appealing, but also to bring social awareness and kind of push forward social justice in a way?
Me, it's been from project to project.
Gotcha.
At one point, living in Haiti, I was invited to celebrate or to be part of the bicentennial the French Revolution bicentennial.
Gotcha. Okay.
So, I mean, I was invited, as a former colonized. I mean, and one lives in Haiti and one, we've been free and stuff like that. Now I'm going off to explain them how I see our history.
Yeah.
And it was mind-boggling to start, to create a whole installation in Paris that would discuss the role of blacks in in their history.
Yeah.
And they were like pretty shocked. You know, like when you come and tell that particular story to them, first of all, in their history books, we are like 3 lines. You know, like in 2 volumes.
The footnotes, yeah.
And I thought that, you know, I had to do a lot of research. I mean, really had to have access to the archives, to the maritime archives in Paris and elsewhere, in Provence, to figure out, you know, like the real how complicated that story was, and how important, you know, like the colony of Saint-Domingue was to them. I mean, for 2 centuries, you know, like they exploited, you know, like blacks and created the first truly marketable commodity around the world, which was sugar, and they had a complete control over it. And, you know, like were the envy of the rest of Western Europe just because of that colony. And of course, the way they did it was, I mean, pretty savagely, because, I mean, a black man that left Africa on his way to the New World, and they would be discussing among themselves, you know, and they would tell the poor ones that were heading towards Saint-Domingue, you won't last 3 years.
Wow.
So, you know, like it was a pretty, I mean, the word is savage. I mean, you know, like, I mean, for even, you know, like these people in the bellies of the boat discussing where they were going, or where they thought they were going, because of course no information was provided, you know, like, and if you were going to the you're dead already. I mean, it's pretty, and these were things, I mean, that you learn and that were being discussed in Paris. They had their own revolution following the revolution of the United States. So it's a very complex thing that one has to put in, you know, like I mean, to put in a way so that people can understand the intricacies and the imbrications and the way this all of this, you know, like coalesce into this thing. Now, I mean, I'm not going to give you a course on history, but just right now I'm in Kentucky, and I arrived there, and I've realized that part of that same story is the United States Civil War. And I find it, you know, that particular history is very, very painful and very complicated. And I don't think that it has been solved. Now, from the questions and answers that I've had with students of where I'm teaching right now, I mean, I just asked them, you know, like most of them are Kentuckians, and my simple question was, on which side of the conflict were your family? And silence. Nobody could explain to me what were they, I mean, but of course I asked them, you know, like, where do you come from in Europe? You know, because they're white, they're Westerners, and, oh, you know, like from the north of England, from the, you know, like, south of France, I mean, German. And I said, you don't know on which side you were in the, I mean, like, they looked at me and they said, okay, we'll find out. And they did go and find out. And it was like very complicated stories. Yeah. You know, some of them had slaves themselves. Some of them had been, you know, like, I mean, their family was, you know, like arrested. I mean, they lost it. And one thing that, and at one point I asked them, why did the South hate so much, you know, like Lincoln? And nobody answered again. I said, what was it? You know, I mean, I'm not from here. I mean, I did study a little bit the Civil War, but you should know. I mean, like, this is your country. Don't they teach it? And one girl rose her hands and said, oh, he was trying to steal our property. Wow. I was like, what? I mean, this sounds like, you know, like Russia. One way to put it. I mean, this is like planned economies and blah, blah, blah. I mean, they don't steal things. And then it just hit me, you know. And, you know, like they were stealing their slaves and stuff like that, and they hated him.
Yeah, I think I've heard another boy put it, they were trying to steal our way of life. And I'm like, wow.
This one was their property.
Yeah, oh, wow. Yeah, well, there you have it.
So that's like, I mean, you have to listen to these things and put them in context and realize that these are effectively ways of life and how people lived back then, and have they realized what it entails. So, I mean, my next statement was like, okay, I'll make sure that I get enough money so I can buy you one day. Yeah. Indeed. Anyways, it's an old history, but they're not that old. Yeah. You know?
So I wanted to make a reference to a work of mine called The Brown Menagerie. So this work was done in response to a study done on the color brown. And so this was done in South America, where they had over 3,000 kids. Each one of them were given a box of crayon, and they were told to choose your favorite color from this box of crayon. And so after 3,000 kids, all the colors were chosen out of the box of crayon, except for the color brown. And so the study went on to talk about the psychology of the color brown. Is it innate in our psyche that we associate the color brown with like decay or something that is rotten? And does that perpetuate into the study of race and how brownness, blackness, and how people of color are treated within our society? And so the three figures kind of represents facets of that, like labor, beauty, aesthetic, the working class as well. And then I also wanted to make sure the work was sensual. And so the work, it looks like chocolate, but it's made out of porcelain. And so it's not only tricking the viewer to want to eat the work as well, but it's also talking about you're able to eat chocolate. You can consume chocolate, but you don't really like black and brown people at the same time. And so the work kind of sits in that nuance. And then I have another work called The Regal Black Madonna that talks about the idea of blackness. And so this work is my reinterpretation of the Virgin Mary. And so kind of taking the crown of the halo, the shell, and kind of just reinterpreting it into this kind of black iconography. And so I guess for me, when it comes to the idea about race and just being black in America, for me it's been this kind of, it's super complex for me. Where growing up in the early 90s, it was not popular to be Haitian. And so I feel like, in the 90s, I spent the majority of my childhood trying to assimilate to be black. But then, in terms of culture, my culture is Haitian. And so I never fully fitted into with my black friends, but then I never fully fitted in with my Haitian friends as well. So I was always stuck in this void of I'm not one, I'm not the other. And so it was really into college where I started to embrace just being Haitian. I'm just like, you know what? If I'm gonna pick a culture, I'm just Haitian, and whatever comes with it, just comes with it, So.
So hearing you talk about like race and identity and culture and color, but then also you talk about being in Kentucky and bringing up these uncomfortable conversations that are relevant, but seems like nobody wants to say anything about. How do you balance producing art that honestly doesn't shy away from culture, race, and sometimes uncomfortable conversations that we need to have? How do you balance that with profitability as an artist and also possibly making some people upset? Like, how does that even ever cross your mind as an artist, or do you go into it like, I want to make you upset?
When I first got to Paris, I went to visit this gallery. I will not mention their names, but the man was very clear that, yes, you're great artists and stuff like that, but I cannot have that many black people in my paintings.
Wow.
So I said, I don't think we're fit,
Yeah.
And that's it, because that's all I can do, and that's what I see, that's how I understand things, and that's not going to happen. And but I've managed, one has to be like, take things, that's what I do, and that's what I want to talk about, that's what excites me. Yeah. And alternate between, yes, I'm a commercial artist somewhere along the line, but I'm also an educator, which I was glad somebody said that, because I've been invited to all these schools to teach and to talk and to this and to that, It provides some money for me. To me, when I hear the term, the beast of burden, I think of the poor blacks, So, am I not gonna paint that?
Yeah.
I don't know if it sells, I'll be happy.
Yeah.
And usually, I've managed, because my work is quite blunt sometimes, and but I think it has some aesthetic merit.
Yeah.
Because yes, it is, but my subjects I've tried to, sugar it off sometimes.
Yeah.
But sometimes you cannot even, just mentioning it is not, you're just being very clear.
Definitely.
about like either your social position, your what you think about things, and
Yeah.
and you cannot hide it.
Yeah, that's true.
So for the last, let me see, 5 years, I've been working with the topic of climate change and how it's affecting brown and brown spaces here in the city. And so this is a work that I did back in 2015. And just imagine, doing work about climate change, about how it's affecting black and brown spaces is not popular. Just imagine, talking to developers that are going to gentrify this entire neighborhood, and they're trying to, keep everything under the low hush. So for me, I've always kind of done work that I was passionate about. I never thought about, the income. And so a lot of these accolades that have come afterwards was a second thought. My first love has always been bringing light and action to the work that I was making. And so for me, with this work here, I found as an artist, the best way to connect with my audience is through allegory. And so I'm able to, I guess, entice the viewer with beauty, with the work. And then once they're in front of the work, I'm able to educate them about the work, to kind of tell them more about, this is what the work is about. And so as a viewer, it's your job to either take the information that I'm giving to you, you can walk away from it. But at the end of the day, my job is just to get you in front of the work, to get you to engage to a certain point.
Got you. As I told both of you all, I had the opportunity to listen to a couple of different interviews from each of you on YouTube, and I wanted to begin to ask, at some point in the panel discussion, questions that I haven't heard you ask before, right? And so this is one of those, so prepare yourself. I think both of you all are very accomplished. You've had opportunities to show your work across the globe, but I would be interested to know, personally, what do you believe is your greatest accomplishment thus far?
My best accomplishment.
Greatest accomplishment, yeah, to you, not necessarily to everyone else, but to you personally. What has been your greatest accomplishment thus far?
Yes. Well, I mean, one thing that I was quite surprised and amused by was the fact that the government of Senegal asked me to create for their brand new museum, the Museum of Black Civilization. I mean, a 40-foot tall sculpture that sits there right now.
Wow.
And I was, very touched, like that. They thought of me, and they wanted me as an emissary from Haiti, and to the point that the sculpture is not from me anymore, it's from the people of Haiti, sent this back to them.
Wow.
I said, well, that's very nice. But I did it.
Definitely, that's beautiful.
And so that was a pleasant, and it was. And right now, I'm like, if it happens, I will be very happy because I'm creating this exhibit for South Africa, and the idea behind it is for me to present my vision of the first Black Republic to them, which are the latest Black Republic.
Gotcha.
So it's like I've been revisiting that concept, that idea. Like how do I present that? How do I do that?
Yeah.
And I've realized many things. One of the first things that I realized was that, the government of Haiti, the rebellion, the revolution, the installment of, the nation of Haiti is very peculiar, and it dates back already, 2 centuries, and this is the first time we see Republican Black dignitaries. Yeah. So that will amuse them very well, and if you put there was one image there, this one. This is the king and queen of Haiti. So I presented them. Yes, as you can see, I'm very interested in history, but I'm also very interested in what the format is. And this is, I think, probably the largest engraving ever. And it's a dry point on plexiglass, and it's 16 feet wide by 8 feet tall. I could make reproductions of it, but what's the point? I like the plexiglass product thing, and that's going to be part of that part of that exhibit. So this is the first time you see, I mean, and of course the Europeans ridiculed, like the fact that we had a king, that we had queens, that we had an emperor, that we whatever. I mean, But at the same time, when you think about it, it's like quite a peculiar situation. Yes, you have kings and queens and dignitaries in Africa, but dressed in European garbs, like in this, it's like this almost surrealist kind of situation. And to present that, I mean, I think it's going to be a very important thing, yes, the world is much bigger than you think.
One thing that I'm proud of this year is I've been given the opportunity to debut some new work at the Venice Biennale in Venice, Italy.
Okay.
And so I've been spending the last couple of months trying to decide like what is the statement that I want to make on this global platform. And so I'm thinking about Blackness in the context of what it means to be Black, what does it mean to be African, what does it mean, what does water mean, what does land mean, and how do we intersect at these different points. And so I'm still dealing with it right now, but sometime in April, I'm going to be debuting some new work for Venice, and so I'm really excited about that.
Wow, that's amazing. So I'll have about 2 to 3 more questions, and I guess we'll open up to the audience. So my next question is, I often, when I watch interviews of people who are very accomplished, we always talk about the success, but sometimes I believe some of the mistakes we make can be teachable moments. And so I would guess my next question would be, what's one mistake that you made throughout your career as a visual artist that has become a very valuable, teachable moment for you?
For me, I'm an overachiever.
Okay.
And I like to do everything myself. And so I've learned, over the course of the last couple of years that, Morel, you can't do everything. And so I've learned to, in order for me to achieve some of my goals, I need to project manage, I need to delegate, I need to either hire interns or hire workers. And so I'm just learning as I'm going. And my ideas are becoming larger, more monumental, and I can't do everything. And so I'm just learning to let go of certain things, even though like I'm knowledgeable about that aesthetic, but it's beyond what I can do at that point.
Yeah.
And so I'm just learning to let go and kind of just let other people join the what is going on in that moment.
Got you.
Well, I think I better join your studio so I can learn how to do that.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, I've never been able to say no, and now I have a pile of work, and I feel like I've become the slave of art in the process. I mean, I certainly will. I mean, you'll teach me how you do that. Anyway,
It's a learning process.
Well, it's exactly that. I mean, one has to delegate just learn how to say no.
Yeah.
And that you're not capable of doing all of that at the same time. Yeah. Which I'm teaching, I have 2 commissions, I have a show in South Africa, and please, calm down. Anyway.
Got you. All right. So this, I think, is a very important question to ask both of you. Although attempts were made to have women artists represented on this panel, unfortunately, conflicting schedules did not allow that to happen. In light of that, who are some historical and contemporary women visual artists you believe people should know about?
We're working. She might be. I've been very interested. I mean, Haiti's art also is another, bone of contention. I mean, what people understand it is, and I believe that there's a lot more complexity to it than what it is. Yeah. And so, I mean, I've been talking with. I've always wanted to do a presentation of the modernist. Especially women in Haiti, because I mean they were somehow brave enough to not to fall. I mean they're a very particular group of women artists in Haiti from the 30s, 40s, and 50s, which have been completely overlooked. And I'm working with Carol Damien and Francie to see if we can create an exhibit or do research around these ladies. I mean, that's just in my thing. But of course, there's millions of women around the world that have done extraordinary things. And that are, inspirations to me. The one I think is the real inspiration is Louise Bourgeois, that has been working all her life. And she got, total celebrity only when she was I mean, at a high age in her life. And I really, you know, every time I say things are not going good for me, I mean, I look at her and say, well, she managed to do something extraordinary. I mean, she was always doing something extraordinary.
Yeah.
So.
Gotcha. Yeah.
She's an inspiration.
Definitely.
For me, it's not a particular artist for me. I would say just women in general. I think my work, especially like this piece over here, a lot of the work that I make, it references the female body, the female form. And so I don't have a particular, like a favorite female artist, but I just draw inspiration from just women everywhere. Where I feel like they've contributed so much to our society, to our culture, to our history. Even going back to what you call Haiti, when the earthquake happened, it was the women that was really running the country, because the men were violent, they were raiding warehouses, they were causing trouble, and the women were the one that were really holding everything down. And so I think at the core of my work, there's always the female form, and this is a recent example of that.
Got you. All right. And so I guess my last question for you would be, I really have two. So I will ask two, and then we'll go to the audience. I apologize. I know I said 2 minutes ago and 4 questions ago, but bear with me. So in your opinion, what is the most rewarding and most challenging part of being an artist?
The most rewarding part is, I think, when the work transcends beyond the studio, where it takes on another form, where it reaches a community and the impact that it has, or the work is in the museum and you're seeing students sitting in front of it, or they're interacting with the work, and then seeing the work, go into the history books. So I feel like, as an artist, you're doing a service beyond yourself, where is a service to the entire globe. And ultimately, this is a message that lives beyond you as an artist. And for me, one of the challenging things as an artist is, again, like saying no. I think as artists, especially like right now in this climate, black art is really, really popular, is really hot. And so I've had great opportunities presented to me, but again, I can't do everything.
Yeah.
And so I have to turn down certain things. And so I'm learning to either pass on the opportunity to another artist that's underlooked and should be recognized as well, and giving them that opportunity to kind of shine.
Gotcha.
So,
The question is, I've always wanted to be an artist. I think, I've started very early, and despite everything, what I'm still amazed at is that they've given me time and support to continue doing it. And it's been, 3-4 decades that I've been doing it. And up to a certain point, I feel very blessed and very privileged. And but I have to start changing this, because it is, in reality, a part of society, and you cannot dissociate art from that. And learning about everything, every aspect, like he has. I mean, me, I'm still like, I can still consider myself self-taught artist, But there are avenues for you to become, like more accomplished, more this, which, like, for example, the city of Miami or the state of the United States has provided to, it's artists, like that should be supported, like be part of something that it's part of life, you understand, and you cannot dissociate it. And, making sure that young kids, whatever color, whatever status, whatever this and that they learn, or be made aware that it's an important, like part of living in society.
Got you. Okay, so my final question will be, I think often, like, we apply diversity and we say we want diversity, and then in particular being in South Florida, I think diversity is a big thing. However, you will go into some spaces and those spaces aren't highly diverse. So for instance, oftentimes in the college classrooms, I teach the only black male in the class. Or, I may have 1 or 2 black students. And I'm connecting it back to you all, in essence, you are contemporary artists, but for the next generation of artists, particularly artists of color, what advice would you give the next generation of artists, and how do we make more museums more inclusive spaces so that we can have more diversity and inclusion in museum spaces?
Yeah. It's
it's a question people have been grappling with for a long time.
Yeah, it is. Well, I mean, it's not only museums that are not inclusive in this country.
No, yeah.
Okay, let's start with general, like knowledge of what's happening out there, and obviously the museums will follow suit. If they have to be inclusive, they will have to be inclusive.
Yeah, and I also think it's also across the arts as well. Like I have a friend of mine, a black woman, but she did opera. And so it was, but to often be the only person in that space is isolating, And so how do we? It's a question I often grapple with. How do we make those spaces more inclusive? So
understanding what made them not inclusive in general. Yeah. I mean, let's start with that. I mean, I don't know what. I mean, why are we targeting the arts?
Yeah.
I think many places are exclusive or not inclusive in this society that we live in this country, and much more so in others. I mean, it's a problem, and I mean, I'm continuing. My work is to educate, and education is part of the way. And knowledge dispel, misunderstanding.
Yeah, definitely.
So for me, that question is a trigger question because I'm a museum educator.
Gotcha.
I've been teaching for over 10 years. I actually oversee the school and tour program at the museum here in the design district.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, as an educator, when I go into the classroom, I'm already breaking a norm.
Mm-hmm.
Where for my museum, I've been the only full-time black person for the last probably 4 years. Yeah. And they recently brought somebody on part-time. Mm. And so I think, it starts at a government level. It goes down into a state level. Mm. So I think when we're doing things like critical race theory, it's kind of like we're kind of like we keep going back, we keep backtracking instead of moving forward. Yeah. So I think in order to kind of just answer that question, it just is multiple directions that needs to be this kind of. It's a lot. It's a big question, but I feel like the arts is one way to combat that. Yeah. But the arts needs additional support, and so by having when people are either gatekeepers or they're in a position of power, being able to recognize that power and making change from that position, and that's the only way we can really move forward.
All right. Does anyone have a question? All right. Here we go.
This question's for Morel. So you mentioned when you were younger that a teacher saw that you had talent. So what were you doing? Like what? Because I see you. This is ceramics, but what were you doing that she noticed?
So my foundation is painting and drawing. I just showed you some recent work that I've been working on. So really, like I said, as early as second grade, I've always been either drawing or just doing things in the classroom that my peers were not doing, And so that particular teacher, she just saw, like I've been I remember she told me that I get student like you maybe once every 5 years, and so I remember very like. She called my mom. My mom thought I was in trouble because and so she called my mom. My mom came to the school, and my mom was like, "You finna get like what did you do in school?" And then she told my mom, "Look, here's a magnet application, and there's a school that will take his skill, and they're gonna push it to the next level." And so throughout elementary through high school, I did mostly painting and drawing. And then in college, I kind of fell in love with clay as a medium. And so for me, I really showed the work in the back. Because for me, ceramic, it holds a unique place in our human history. When you think about archaeology, many of our human history is understood because of what is left behind by different cultures. And so we're able to study the diet, the history, the artwork, the carving, which is left on the which is left on clay. And so ceramic is really one of my first love, and then painting, drawing, and everything else come kind of second after that. So.
All right, thank you for the question. We have another. All right, and then we'll have you next.
Thank you. My question is sort of a follow-up to the last question that you asked, which I think was great, where you were talking about diversity. So I'm a mom of 2 young kids, and I always want to take my children everywhere, and I want them to be exposed to things. And I just wonder, for you as artists in this environment, what do you think the outcome would be if museums became places where they were just an extension of a child's education? If all children always had access to art museums, how do you think that that would impact art and our society and our experience as we grow and develop?
So as a museum educator, my approach to teaching is inquiry-based learning. So essentially, as an educator, I'm really a facilitator, and I'm not lecturing these kids in the classroom. And so I've had moments in the gallery as well as in the classroom where that one student who never spoke all semester completely lights up in the classroom. So I think we need to dismantle the current structure of education because it's not working. I feel like if teachers are given more agency in the classroom, instead of trying to test these students every 6 months, every 3 months where I'm testing, and we go back to actually teaching content, we can really transform and allow the child the space to dream, to learn, and to really just understand like what they're trying to learn, you know? And so, you know, as a museum educator, I hope that parents like yourself do come to the museum, and the museum hopefully have resources where you're able to engage within the gallery. There's books, there's audio. So I think, you know, it's a work in progress. You know, each museum is not perfect, but I hope the museum use their resources in order to better serve the community, because at the end of the day, the museum exists because of the community. So they have an obligation to listen to what the community needs and want, you know? So.
And I'll add to that. I think it's very important to get the kids there, but I think it's also very important for the children to be able to see themselves. If you go to a space and you do not see representation that resembles your own background, it can be very isolating. I remember I teach a class called Hip Hop Across Borders, and it looks at the global impact of hip hop. And I remember we did a whole section on Latin America in the class, and one class was dedicated to Puerto Rico. And I had a student who lit up like I've never seen her lit up before, and she was a senior. And she thanked me after class, sent me an email and said, this is the first time ever in college I got a chance to see my own culture explored in the class. And so we got to get the kids to the museums, but I think we also have to diversify the representation of who is being shown in the museums as well. Yeah. All right. We have a question right here.
Thank you. Thank you. I just want to congratulate you for the achievements. It's really extraordinary to be in front of artists, and Morel, you are really young. I remember you 6 years ago teaching the kids and sitting in the floor at the museum, and seeing you now in the path to Venice. My question to you directly, and thank you for your questions. You see, we don't have many more to ask.
Thank you.
But Morel, for you, what are your expectations after the Biennale? And sir, I have the privilege to be in front of your painting about the god and goddess underwater that is exhibited at the Paris Art Museum. And what is the importance of the use of color in your creativity?
Great questions. Yeah.
Oh man. So I've been trying to be, you know, again, like the bar for me is always high. And so I told myself that my only goal would just be to be present. To enjoy the culture and to just keep it at that. You know, I want to put any big expectation on myself. And so after Venice, hopefully the work can evolve, transform, and kind of go be beyond that for me. So I'm actually giving a lecture at the end of the month back at my college, the Maryland Institute College of Art. So one thing that I find with young artists that are still in school about to graduate is a lot of them are ill-equipped to deal with the art world once they come out of school. They don't know anything about finances, budgeting, taxes, and I feel like the school are doing these students a disservice. And so I feel like many of these colleges, they teach content. These students are learning the skill set, they're trying to refine their work, trying to come up with a voice, but then they graduate and they're just like, now what? What do I do with this skill set? And so I feel like a lot of these colleges, they're ineffective and they need to restructure their career development or their post-graduation of how students transition from school to work. And I find it all the time where kids, where students are, they're emailing me, oh, I don't know what to do, or I don't know how to do this, and it's like the college are not teaching this in school. And I think also with on the MFA level, I feel like we need to change the narrative. Not all artists with an MFA are going to be a great artist. And I feel like sometimes artists are overlooked because they don't have the MFA, and sometimes there's teachers that have the MFA, they're teaching on a college level, but they haven't been in the art world in 10, 15 years, you know? So I feel like colleges need to open up their doors to candidates that reflect the world we live in. So I think artists should be able to teach at a college without like an MFA. If the resume is there and the work is there, then why shouldn't that teacher be considered on the same level as somebody that has the MFA as well? So it's just a lot of things.
They have a department. I mean, they have within the art department, I mean, very good teachers in glass, very good teachers in photography, and very good teachers in clay. So, you know, I said, okay, how am I going to do this with this department, and not only with their students, but students from different departments. I mean, there is social sciences and stuff like that. And I made in my convocation, I invited the whole school to participate, which was a big mistake. But we are managing to do things. I mean, the first thing I thought about is that to look at photography and the history of photography, and we've decided to work with a format that I'd never used before, which are cyanotypes, and they were invented during probably the period of the Civil War. So, I mean, they are thrilled because I brought that in and said that they should teach me, and we should teach the students, you know, like how to use and how to produce cyanotypes, and everybody followed in suit. I mean, the glass people will do part of the project because it's going to be a permanent exhibit within the school. So, I mean, there's ways to do it.
And I also think like one way to revamp the curriculum, and it kind of speaks to what Morel said and what you're saying as well, ask the students what they need. Like I was in a communication departmental meeting and we were talking about revamping the curriculum and doing a lot of things. And I asked, well, has anyone asked the students what they need? Has anyone done like a post-graduation survey, asked the seniors what they need? And no, I'm like, so we could develop a whole curriculum that may not be beneficial to the students that we're trying to service. Right. You know, and I think a lot of the departments also, to speak to what you're saying, is well, this is the way we've done this since 1980. Right. It's 2020. Yeah, you know, like you can't. It has to evolve. It has to change. It has to keep up with the times.
How do you think programs like this can impact our community?
I think that this was a marvelous program today with two Haitian American artists, significant artists, Edouard Duval-Carrie and Morel, Doucet.
What was your favorite part about this talk?
Specifically learning about the presentation of those artists today, specifically about diversity, about Caribbean art, a lot of history, not just the art, but the history, about what brought us all together here in South Florida, specifically Miami, being very diverse community and Caribbean people, definitely that art needs to be more talked about and more visible to the public.
I think it's very important, particularly in this time of social change and actually the reckoning that we're having in our society, to have more representation for our communities, more representation of all races, colors, and creeds, and to, I think that this will help to break down the doors of exclusivity that are typically seen in our museums, and it will allow children to begin to see themselves, to reflect, to see their own visions when they come to museums, to be able to connect more with their cultures. And possibly in the future, that will lead them to have other avenues for job paths. And it's not just artists. There are so many other jobs available that the community would not know about. They could become curators. They could become conservators. It could lead to becoming a gallerist, becoming a global art dealer. You know, things that they typically would not be exposed to and not know. They can start coming in now at a young age, meeting these types of artists that represent their own backgrounds.